For more on the humanitarian situation in Gaza, we can bring in Shana Low, the communications advisor for the Norwegian Refugee Council's Palestine mission. She joins us from the Jordanian capital, Amman. Good morning, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Good morning.
Shana, you talked to France 24 back when the ceasefire in Gaza was first announced. At the time, you were quite emotional with hope about how it could improve life for the people there. How would you describe what the situation is like there now?
The situation is still incredibly dire. While we've seen that the level of bombing and death has diminished, it still is ongoing. We still hear about people being killed nearly every day, around over 1,100 since October. And we've seen that the level of aid is nowhere near what it needs to be. People are still living in incredibly difficult conditions. NRC leads the shelter cluster, and about 90% of Palestinians in Gaza, 1.98 million, are still in need of emergency shelter assistance. This isn't for lack of humanitarian agencies trying to get in aid, but it has to do with the restrictions that are imposed on us, including who can bring in materials, what type of materials can enter, and the pace of their entry. And so we're very limited in terms of what we can actually do to make things better. We're often just providing stopgaps, and it's a very precarious situation where any disruption to the flow right now could result in a serious deterioration very quickly for people on the ground.
Can you talk a bit more about those restrictions you mentioned? I mean, they're coming from the Israeli government?
Yes, these are restrictions imposed by the Israeli government. They change pretty regularly. Just this week, I learned that there were new restrictions on the type of wood and the width of the wood that can enter to 1 centimeter, which is about half an inch. Not very stable material to build or improve makeshift shelters. Really, at this point, we should be moving towards transitional shelter options, getting people out of tents into more secure living situations. But because we aren't able to bring in essential materials, because we're basically limited to tarpaulins and tents, people are living in the same type of conditions, unable to improve them. And those are materials that deteriorate every few months and need to be replaced.
The Israeli government, tends to say that its restrictions have to do with maintaining safety, that supplies that are brought in by humanitarian groups can be taken by Hamas and other groups that want to do bad things with it. What do you say to that justification?
Humanitarian agencies, particularly operating in the occupied Palestinian territory, are experienced in ensuring that our aid is not diverted, to ensure that it reaches people in need. We have lots of systems in place to ensure that and monitor where our aid is going, and the amount of aid that we're bringing in or would be bringing in is not very much relative to what could be done with it. It would be very difficult for this aid to be weaponized, and the justification that Israel is making, or the claims that Israel's making, we've proven time and again are not true, and also this isn't these. There can't be justification for denying humanitarian access. Israel, as the occupying power, has an obligation, as reaffirmed by the International Court of Justice, to facilitate the entry of humanitarian assistance and not impose undue restrictions or delays. And what we've seen is that the number of crossings have been limited. Only one is operational right now. The number of aid agencies that are able to bring in aid directly to Gaza is limited, including NRC, where I work. We've been unable to bring in aid since February of 2025. And so we're relying on aid brought in by partners that we're able to distribute. But the conditions on the ground are simply unimaginable. 9 months into a ceasefire, we would have expected that the conditions for people would have improved by now.
What are sort of the most urgent needs? Is it housing? Is it need for medical supplies? Is it food? What are the most important needs at this point?
people are still living in crisis on a whole matter of issues, but for sure, shelter is a major issue. As I mentioned, people are continuing to live in really horrific conditions. It's extremely hot inside of the tents and makeshift shelters. The wash situation, water sanitation, and hygiene is horrible. Nearly every family is living within 10 meters of sewage. And the equipment getting in, it's not just about the pipes that we're unable to bring in, but it's also about getting in the fuel needed to run generators, the lubricant oil in order to operate machines. We're unable to scale up, and at this point, we're actually seeing a reduction in the amount of access to safe water that people have because machines are unable to run for as long as they're able to, because we're being forced to limit the amount of work we're able to do due to the restrictions on the entry of items and the scarcity that's been engineered over the last 3 years and continues to prevent civilians from getting access to the aid that they need.
Shana, Gaza clearly still in crisis, but I also want to ask you quickly about the West Bank, because your organization recently published a report on how violence and displacement has been increasing there. In fact, just this morning, at least one person was killed in a shooting incident. Can you tell us what your group found in that report?
Well, what we've seen is that the situation in the West Bank, as in Gaza, is deteriorating rapidly. Over the last 3.5 years, there have been 47 communities in the West Bank that have been completely erased from the map, and 95 other communities that have experienced partial displacement, largely due to settler violence. What we've seen is that settler violence has increased considerably in the last 3 years, and the intensity of the violence has increased, the frequency of the violence has increased. Now we're seeing about 6 settler attacks each day against Palestinians. And what we're seeing is that they're often happening, this violence is often happening under the protection or with the support of Israeli forces. We've also seen that the settlers have resorted to using sexual or gender-based violence when attacking communities and forcing them, and that's often the trigger to force them to flee. We've seen now in the last couple of weeks, Israeli NGOs have reported that 18% of the West Bank is now controlled by Israeli outposts because of the expansion of their settlements and the increasing restrictions placed on and violence against Palestinian communities living throughout the West Bank.
All right, well, we will continue to keep a close eye on the situation. Shana, thank you again so much for coming on the program this morning. That was Shana Low, the communications advisor for the Norwegian Refugee Council's Palestine mission.
Thank you.